All right, everybody. Welcome to day 3 of the Dealing with Feeling Book Club. And obviously, you know who I am, but I'll just say it anyway. I am Marc Brackett, and my day job is I am the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence and a professor in the Child Study Center, the author of the book that all of you are reading called Dealing with Feeling. And I'm just delighted to be here to be in conversation with you. Since this is that bonus one, that extra book club, what I wanted to do today was really answer questions about the chapters. At this point, many of you have gotten a chance to read the book. Some of you, when you were signing up for the book club, about 1,000 people signed up for the club this year. And those people were asked questions like you. What are you interested in learning? What questions do you have? And so tonight, I wanted to really focus on that. And when does the Lewis Howes podcast air? It will air in about 2 weeks. Lots of different podcasts that I'll be on. The Lewis Howes podcast. One is called Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson. 10% Happier. All different kinds of conversations, about this work. So you can watch those later. But now we got to focus on our podcast, or not our podcast, our book club. Okay. So while I'm getting started here, why don't each of you start putting in any of your questions that are coming up for you right now? But today, what I want to start with is so last night I was doing an event for my book, and people asked me, what are the top 3 um, things that you hope people will get out of your book? I'm going to put that onto you right now. If you were me answering that question and you've read the book, what would you say, or what would you argue for, or just say, would be the top 3 takeaways? What would you hope that everyone in the world would learn after reading my book, Dealing with Feeling? And that sounds a little crazy for me to ask you what I would think, but I'm really curious. And I'll get to those questions in a minute. But what would you hope would be the top 3 takeaways? Just take a moment and think about that, please. Emotional literacy, equanimity, compassion. Thank you. Well, while you're thinking, I will share with you my first one. My first one is that emotion regulation is 100% learned. How many of you now, after reading the book, or at least part of the book, have bought into that belief system that we're not born knowing how to breathe properly necessarily to calm our nervous systems down? We're not born knowing, we have different mindsets about feelings. We're not born with an emotion vocabulary. We're not born knowing how to go from self criticism to self compassion. We're not kind of born knowing how to kind of relate to people and ask them for support and help. Does that resonate with you? That kind of the primary kind of takeaway is that this is a learned phenomenon? Okay. The second one that I would say, and I'm going to go to yours in a minute after I share with you mine. The second one I would say is that there's no correct strategy, which is this phenomenon about like criterion of correctness is really a big deal for me. That people, whenever I give workshops or trainings on emotion regulation, like, well, Marc, cut through the chase. What's the top strategy to help people regulate? And I'm like, there is no correct strategy. It's what works for you, given who you are, given what emotion you're feeling, given the context you're in. Because remember, emotion regulation is a set of goals and strategies that are a function of the emotion, the person, the context. Remember our opening formula? And so the point is that there is just no criteria for like correctness. It's you try these strategies out. They work sometimes, sometimes they don't work. If they don't work, you try other strategies. And that's the game that we play with emotion regulation. Does that sit with you well? That the whole goal of this work is to fill your buckets with knowledge and skill in terms of all the different areas of regulation, from the cognitive to the social to the vocabulary pieces. And then we go out in the world and we get activated or we try to initiate an emotion and we have to practice the strategy and see if it works. Yes? Does that make sense? Okay. I need feedback on my 100%, Manta says. Thank you, Manta. The third takeaway, which I think is the most important of all, is how would you feel if I were to assert that the ultimate goal of emotion regulation is to make it part of your identity? That in the end, my vision, my dream would be that every one of you here who are, you know, learning about this and reading the book, that you would kind of finish the book and work towards making healthy emotion regulation a part of your identity. How does that sound to you? And when I say that I hope that emotion regulation becomes part of your identity, what do you think I actually mean by that? Like, what does that make you think about? I'm very curious to hear your perspectives on this. So please write them in the chat. So Christy is saying we should start this in grad school or grade school. You are correct. Actually, I'm visiting a school in Denver right now. This is a middle school and a high school, fully integrated. But of course, we work with schools where this starts in preschool. So someone says, I love the identity piece. Reminds me of the book Atomic Habits, where habits become part of identity. Nice. That it become intrinsic to us. Intentional time spent understanding emotions. Nice. So what does that mean? When I say that emotion regulation is part of your identity, what am I actually getting at there? What would, if it were part of your identity, what would be different about how you handled emotions? This is not, this is the YouTube audience participation part of this book club. So if emotion regulation became part of your identity, what would be different for you and other people? Nice. Kelly saying modeling healthy regulation. I'd be more prepared, more tuned into my feelings, self-awareness, co-regulation. Nice. Handling emotions would be a regular part of life. I'd understand what my emotions were telling me and not react to situations. Being mindful, recognizing, being the scientist versus the judge, less reactive and defensive. Nice. I think that's the idea. And, I may have shared this before, but I'll share it again. After writing the book and really thinking about dealing with feeling, I started making the co-regulation piece, or even how I dealt with people who are activating me or trying to activate me, into a game. So what I mean by that is I would actually I'd shift into this. Mark is the feelings master. Mark is the leading expert in dealing with feeling. And I literally make, when someone else, is upset or I need to help them or they're trying to kind of make me go nuts, I would just make it into a game of creativity. And it was really fun. And I still do this today. I'm like, this person is testing my creativity. And so I'm not going to let them have power over me. I'm the emotional intelligence guru, and I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to play with this person. I'm going to ask good questions, and it really works. So I encourage you to put yourself in that place of identity. All right, I'm seeing other things in the comment section. situational awareness, identify, pick a strategy, implement it seamlessly. I have choices about how to react. Exactly. Good. So, three big takeaways. One, emotion regulation is 100% learned. Two is there's no correct strategy, that the strategy that I use in any given moment are a function of how I'm feeling, you know, who I am and who I'm with or where I'm at. Okay? That's like a key takeaway. Any other questions that are coming up for you? If not, I'm going to go to the questions that I have analyzed. So I did a content analysis of the questions, and one of them is going to the end of the book. And I thought it would be really interesting to just talk about the meta moment. How many of you have read about the meta moment technique that is in the book? Or how many of you know about the meta moment technique? Just give me some kind of indication in the chat that you're familiar with the four-step process in the meta moment. Haven't gotten that far. Somebody says yes. Other people, your comfort level with the meta moment. Okay. Well, let me give you the meta moment now, and that way you'll. Sometimes you can read and then get reinforced. Sometimes you can listen to the lecture and then read it, and it digests even more easily. Are you ready? So, the meta moment is a four-step process to help us manage our difficult emotions. And this is I'm going to link this to a question that people had, which is, how do you get better at dealing with your quote unquote triggers? So, step one is you have the self-awareness that you're actually triggered, that you're even aware that you're not just going from trigger to automatic reaction, that you are sensing the shift in your thinking, your physiology, and that's an indication that a strong emotion is coming into you, and or you're experiencing a shift in your environment that is not going to be comfortable, and you stop and you pause and you take that breath. So 4 steps. Step one is called sense. Step two is stop, where you take that breath. And the magic in the meta moment is step three. And step three is where we pause to think about the best versions of ourselves. And so let's all try that tonight together. When you think about you, the best version of you, I'm going to ask you in the chat to provide me with 3 adjectives that you would use to describe the best version of yourself. And I'm going to ask you to collapse across all roles tonight: parent, teacher, husband, wife, partner, son, daughter, whatever you are. If you were to just think about yourself, right? Marc Brackett, the human being, wants to see himself as someone who has these qualities. Those qualities are whatever they are. For each of you, please take a moment and think about this. My best self has these qualities. What are those qualities? So I'm seeing in the chat: powerful, compassionate, clarity, wholehearted, balanced, humble, curious, compassionate, caring, empathetic, good listener, altruistic, compassionate, merciful, empathetic, compassionate, creative, intelligent, authentic, caring, calm, humble, caring, empathetic, composé. I guess that's composed. Kind, patient, attentive, creative, passionate, curious. Nice. A lot of compassion there, a lot of caring, a lot of good listening. Beautiful. So why does that matter for the meta moment? Why do you think pausing between stimulus and response to activate your best self, what is your thought pattern or what are your beliefs about why doing that would be helpful to healthy regulation? What are your thoughts about that? Why would pausing to reflect on your best self be beneficial to healthy regulation? Grounding myself, living into my values, is an ideal to aim for. Brings your values into the forefront of your mind. All really good answers. Not get wrapped up in the intensity of the emotion. Exactly. So let's think about it for a minute. You know, you're at home, you're at work, you're with your kids, whatever, and you get triggered, whatever that is. For me, at my job, it's about entitlement. I can't stand students who have entitlement issues. It's when someone intentionally treats you with disrespect. So in that moment, I'm ready to say like, "Who the heck do you think you are?" Whatever it might be. But instead, I take a breath and I'm like, "Mark, now here's the trick. In the beginning, you can use adjectives. Okay, Mark, remember, you're compassionate, you're kind, you're loving." What I do now is I literally have created this like image of myself, like a little smurf or a little caricature of Mark, the emotional intelligence expert, the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence. Because when Mark himself gets triggered or activated, Mark wants to say something or retaliate. But the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence, I hold him in the highest of regard. That is the kind of the Wizard of Oz, of emotional intelligence, or the Yoda of emotional intelligence. And so when I kind of distance myself from myself and consider my best self, what happens is that I choose and use more adaptive strategies. Because, like people said here, that I'm aligning my action with my idealized self or my values. Does that resonate for you, everyone? That's the power of the meta moment. And I think what makes the meta moment unique or different from other forms of emotion regulation training is this special step of thinking about, the self that you aspire to be. And this is different in different roles. So Mark, the presenter, like um, my best self for that role is different than Mark, the husband, for example. Okay. So step one is sense. Step two is stop. Step three is see your best self. And step four is strategize and act. And so the strategize and act piece is what comes out of the best self. And that's what the whole book is for. So that means maybe the strategy is, Mark, you have no reason to get involved in this. Just shut up, Mark. Keep it to yourself, Mark. No one cares about your opinion about this, Mark. It doesn't matter. Don't say a word. Maybe it's the self-talk strategy. Maybe it's just, Mark, stay breathing. This too shall pass. Maybe it's, Mark, you got to say something, but say it in a kind way to get the person to stop their behavior. It's a social strategy. So do you see how the goal of this work is to go from the sense to the stop to the seeing your best self, and then through that lens of our best selves, we then choose and use the best strategy to achieve the desired outcome. Let me pause there for a minute. Any questions about the meta moment? I like this. I've heard it described and imagined as a toggle switch on my forehead. That's cute. It is system one, system two. You're getting in to that exact piece of the Kahneman um, fast thinking, fast and slow kind of thinking. Exactly. Any questions about the four-step process? I'm going to share one that I got today in my presentation, where someone asked me, well, actually, this was in relation to a very famous sports person who I just won't mention who it is because it doesn't matter. But it's a sports person who is extraordinarily skilled, but when loses, just like puts on a show of pouting and like kind of like bad behavior. And this person asked me, who is a very famous person in psychology, he said, well, Mark, um, this person, if I were to teach them your technique, would say that they're just being their authentic self. And their authentic self is not performative and not like controlling their feelings. Their authentic self is just being their true self and saying, you know, demonstrating this poor behavior because that's what they feel is necessary for the moment. So I'm going to put this on you tonight. How would you respond to that? The difference between one's authentic self and one's best self. I'm sorry, I'm forcing you to kind of really think critically about this. So let's take a moment and think about it. What is the difference between how would you respond to the person who says, I'm just being my authentic self, you know? I'm not gonna put on a, I don't need to be my best self. How would you, if you were teaching this or you're getting the feedback that I got from somebody, what would you say? I like this, Kelly. One word, leadership. Can you say more, please, about that? It sounds like their reactions are in charge of their behavior. The authentic is the automatic that might be responding to trauma. Interesting. Authenticity might involve impulsiveness. Best self is focused on intention. I like that. Nice job, Christy. Authentic self are attributes. The best self is the ideal. Also, it sounds like a cop out to excuse bad behavior. Love it. How do you want to be remembered? Love it. This is a good group. Inside thoughts and outside actions are different, and you can choose which is best for you or the situation. Excellent. All like really cool responses, by the way. I'm loving this. I mean, I thought about it this way, very aligned with all of you. My authentic self is who I am in private. My best self is who I am in public. My authentic self is coal. My best self is the diamond. You guys are gonna get like extra certificates of accomplishment for this. You can be authentic, but you also have the opportunity to grow. I um I really appreciate all these comments, and I think they're spot on. I was thinking something along the lines of like my authentic self, you know, like my true authentic self. I think I don't think anybody would like me. I mean, let's be I mean, I don't know if I would be married. I don't know if I would have any brothers or friendships because, sometimes my authentic self is like wants to roll their eyes in a conversations, wants to say something that is not very kind. And that is my authentic self. I am feeling that in the moment, but like how necessary is that to my relationships? How necessary that is that to my leadership? And so I really appreciate this. I love this conversation. So authentic self is part of your identity, no doubt. But I think the point we're making here, which is so helpful, is that our best self, is a role model. Our best self is maybe not even allowing our authentic self to be displayed because truthfully, our authentic self might sacrifice our reputation. Good question. So people think their authentic self is just being flat out who I am in the moment. Right. So this is the example of this athlete who, authentic self is pissed off that they lost the game and they slam the racket, let's say it's tennis, and they scream and they're like, F this and F you, and they pull and not they pulse, they pout and they walk off, kind of like regress to like a 5-year old on let's say it's in tennis. And so that person says, you're trying to tell me I should be my best self, but I want to be my authentic self because if I'm my best self, that's not who I truly am. Do you see what I'm getting at here? And my question to everybody was, how do you respond to that through the lens of emotion regulation, emotional intelligence? Yes, that's your unregulated self. But somebody may say, well, that's just who I am. Why do I have to be regulated? Like, I don't want to be regulated. I just lost the match and I'm pissed. And I'm just going to show people that I'm pissed because I want to be my true self. Do you see what I'm getting at? So someone's saying, Roxanne is saying, both can be coexist, but a choice is made by the person to be authentic or best. Um, I think it's an important thing to kind of clarify for people that our authentic self doesn't disappear when we're our best self. My authentic self can be completely pissed and completely, ready to wring someone's neck. But what kind of role model am I for young kids as an athlete? Right? If aspiring people, aspiring tennis players are watching this match, what's the message, right, that is being sent? And so I think we're not denying people their authentic selves, but we're trying to help people maybe think a little bit differently about their best selves to both be a role model for healthy regulation, but also on how to preserve relationships. Because sometimes our authentic selves, I mean, let's be real, they may not actually lead to great outcomes for ourselves. No, authentic doesn't have to be worse self. I like my best self is someone my grandmother would be proud of. She loves my authentic self, but she's proud of my best self. Like that, Allison. Thank you. Okay. This is really cool. This is why these things are interesting to talk through over a book club because we can kind of just have a conversation and kind of think about these concepts more. Depends on the stakes. I appreciate that. You're right. And I don't think many of us actually are thinking about the quote unquote stakes when we react as opposed to respond to our emotions. Because maybe if I were to ask that athlete, how would you want to be seen and talked about by your fans? Do you want to be seen and talked about as a lunatic who's like throwing things and pouting? I mean, look, you are one of the top athletes in the world, by the way, which is pretty freaking amazing. Um, what if you were to think about the best role model that you could be for young athletes to aspire to be someday in your position? What does that look like? Does that resonate? Deidre, I really appreciate what you're saying too. This is so important to surface with our kids. We do have our authentic 5-year-old selves, which would not use our frontal cortex to weigh thoughts, goals, and outcomes. Nice point. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to the application of the meta moment. So the meta moment in its current form, four-step process, is generally viewed as something we would do in response to a difficult emotion. I am triggered, I pause, I breathe, I think about my best self, and I respond through that lens. But it's hard to do in the moment. How many of you have ever like been triggered, tried to take a meta moment and failed? Anyone willing to accept that or admit that? First yes. All of us have, right? So the best way, not the best way, but um, the way to build the muscle is to be preventative and proactive. So if I were to tell you that there is something called a proactive meta moment, what would that mean to you? What is a proactive meta moment? What is a proactive meta moment? Thinking ahead of the situation, forward thinking plan to use a strategy, planned ahead of time, practicing in situations that are low stakes. Exactly. Visualizing ahead of time, rehearse in advance the response. Yes, these are all excellent responses. So it could be mental rehearsal, like playing it out in your head, a visualization exercise. Like when this happens, Mark, you can do this. Like that can be your response. Kelly, you're making good points. Planned in cold cognition. You use this as a recovery facilitator. That's wonderful. Using prime. When you practice a strategy often, so when they happen, you handle it better. Thank you, Lynn, for my own example, right? Knowing your mother-in-law is in the kitchen, taking her breath and playing out the encounter. Yeah. So the idea here is that I know, firstly, the whole point of the proactive meta moment is knowing what your triggers are. So knowing ahead of time that your kid is going to whine at the end of the day, knowing ahead of the time that your fuse is going to be shorter at the end of a work day, knowing ahead of time from my situation, I was talking about my mother-in-law is going to be staring at me when I get home from work and asking me what I want for dinner again. Um, whatever that might be. That's the we know that's the pre-sense piece. And so if you know that, then why don't we take the meta moment before we enter into the situation? So before I walk into my house at the end of a long day, before I grab the handle, say, Mark, take a deep breath. How do you want to be seen? How do you want to be talked about? How do you want to be experienced today, in this very moment? Oh, I want to be patient. I want to be kind. Okay. What does that look like? Okay, I got it. And then you open the door and then you can meet your family and you've been primed to respond through the lens of your best self. Does that make sense to everybody? That, we can try a lot in the moment and we will succeed at some points. But once we kind of have that awareness of those things that really kind of make us nuts, the things that make us dysregulated, what we can do is we can be just more forward looking, more um, proactive in our ways of dealing with it. And it's worked wonders for me because I work pretty long hours, like probably many of you do. And I know that I'm going to be like in rare form when I get home after a long trip. This happened to me a couple months ago. I was in Australia and I was burnt and we had something that had to get done. It didn't get done. And I just was like a lunatic. And I was like, Mark, take a minute moment. I was like, ugh, I can't do it. And I only had wished that before I got out of the car to walk into my house, I just given myself the space to just like decompress, compartmentalize kind of all the stress I had just endured from the trip, and just said, Mark, just show up as your, the best loving husband in the world. Don't let things get to you. You're tired. Don't let whatever happens trigger you. And what's nice about that is that it's kind of that little voice in your head that says, remember what you just said, Mark? You want to be your best self? Like you haven't seen your family in a week. So that's the proactive meta moment. Emotional labor is related to it. Emotional labor is, technically speaking, Roxanne, is the emotion expression that I feel I need to show to meet the demands of my work environment. So, for example, police officers, at the airport, move the car. They may not be feeling like they have to be nasty and stern, but what they're doing is they know that that emotion is going to get people to respond to them. And that's the challenge with emotional labor separately, is that when our, you know, true feelings are not aligned with, are separate from our emotional labor, that can cause challenges for us over time. It's like, I always think kindergarten teachers have the hardest job of all. Good morning, everyone. They have to be happy and cheerful. And then they go home to their families and they've like put out all this positivity and high energy and smiling and good job tying those shoelaces, Johnny. And then their own kids who may be the same age as the ones they're teaching, they're spent. That's emotional labor. So I think what's cool that you just made me think of is that the meta moment can be especially helpful if you have a career where you are engaging in a lot of emotional labor and want to be able to switch out of that kind of labor to be your best self when you get home or something else. Okay. So let me pause there. Any questions coming up for anybody? Any questions coming up for people? What are you thinking right now? How are we feeling about this meta moment technique? Just grabbing my water here. Yeah, you can't predict anything. You can't ensure, anything is going to happen. But I think what's cool about this is that it it almost doesn't even matter what comes at you if you put yourself in that mindset. Like I was sharing earlier today, in this, not earlier today, but half hour ago, that I now sometimes, like if I'm in a situation where I know people are going to be kind of challenging me, I just go into Mark, you're the Yoda of emotional intelligence. And then I just have that Yoda person, like, it's like Yoda does not get triggered. Yoda is amazing at pivoting. Yoda is amazing at sparring, you know, doing these fancy martial arts techniques. Yoda can take anything and not be affected by it and come back with a great question to get people to think more about their thoughts. Does that resonate? Yes. So the proactive meta moment would involve anticipation and preparation, 100%. So, what are my go to strategies when your counterpart in a conversation is not meeting the moment, too? I think for me, it's just curiosity. You know, right now the field of social and emotional learning is under the gun, and I just wrote an op-ed that's going to come out early next week on my response to people thinking we need to rebrand the field of social and emotional learning. I'm like, that's ridiculous. We're not rebranding the field. It's been around for 35 freaking years. There's a strong evidence base. Can we just get really super clear about what it's about? Now, so when I've gotten challenged, for example, I've been challenged publicly. Like, you're brainwashing kids, or you are pushing your liberal values, or whatever it might be. I just take a deep breath and I say, what is your understanding of what SEL is? And I just like, that's it. I just sit there and then I have to shut up and I just sit there and I breathe and I smile and I say, I'm just, what makes you think that's what Ruler does, our approach? Where did you see that ever implemented that way? And that's, I think just not being antagonistic, asking honest, authentic questions. So my best self is like, in that moment is like, I'm not going to let this person get the best of me. I know my shit. I know this stuff. And so just take that breath, ask that question, and see what they say. Does that make sense? How do you feel about that? I'm looking at other questions here. So, Lori, I'm going to get to your question in a minute. Let me just go through your questions now. This is great. And then, so Lori's question is how to motivate kids to become interested and engaged into learning emotional intelligence. I think the missing link in terms of kids being motivated to learn about this is they don't see the value proposition of it. And so by getting students, for example, what are you struggling with? Is it friendships? Is it, studying for school? Is it achieving like your yellow belt in karate? What are the things that, where your feelings get the best of you? And what are you struggling with? And then they list them out. I'm struggling with this. This is hard, da da da. And then you say, well, what if I had some strategies that you could learn that would help you deal with that more effectively? What do you think about that? So, for example, last week I was visiting another school in New Hampshire, and one student said to me, I don't think any of these things that you're teaching me can work because I don't just feel anxiety, I am anxiety. That was a tough one, right? When someone just, their whole identity is the strong, unpleasant feeling of anxiety. What do you think? How would you respond to that if you were me or you were trying to support that person? It's hard. And so what I did is I didn't want to get defensive. I didn't want to say like, well, research shows that you're not your feelings. That's, you experience feelings. I like that you are not your anxiety. I felt in that moment, um, I wanted to know how how do you define anxiety for yourself? How do you see it? What does anxiety mean to you? What's your experience with it? Tell me why you think that way about yourself. And then I said, after we got through some of that, which went, I thought, really well, she got really kind of engaged in the conversation. I said, what are the strategies that you've been working on? This was a high school student. And so I said, what strategies, have you been trying to help you with this? And the girl had the young woman had a hard time kind of articulating that. Um, and I said, well, what if I provided you with some strategies? Would you be interested in learning them to try them out? And she was like, there's strategies that I could use. And I think the that remember what the research showed in my book was that 90% of us never learned anything about how to deal with emotions. And so this young woman just didn't really even know where to begin with the process. And what if she were to just take a moment and journal each time she was feeling anxious? Just jot down, you know, what are you doing? How are you feeling? What's going on in your head? And just take some time to do that experiment and then look at it. And then we can, work together to think about, are there certain triggers for your anxiety? Is it about testing? Is it about your friendships? Is it about something else? And then we can work towards the whether it's the deactivation strategies, whether it's the reframing strategies. Does that do you see how there's no antagonism there? It's just pure kind of compassion and me asking questions to learn more, to help. Yeah, I did say that. Um, and then let this person see for herself that she is not anxiety, that she experiences anxiety during these particular moments. It's not all the time. There are moments actually when maybe she's walking in nature where she's not feeling anxiety, but she's feeling anxiety when she's with these people or studying this particular content area. But her memory and her story is that she's anxious all the time. That's, by the way, why the How We Feel app is so helpful. Yes, it is the coach approach. And you're right. Part of it is that everybody says, anxiety is the kind of like the catchphrase for all strong, unpleasant feelings. You can start with the physical sensations too. Yeah, the new app has that physical piece where you can check in with your body too. So please check that out. Any other questions that people have about the meta moment, um, or anything in general? We've got about 10 minutes left. Let me look at what some of the questions that came in were. So one question is about how do I build emotional granularity? I suggest using the How We Feel app. It is free. It has 144 emotions built into the app, plus another 500 in the search function. Tons of feelings, everyone with its own definition. So go there. This is an interesting one. How do I work with negative talk and rumination, like reframing without gaslighting yourself? I like that question because I think a lot of people have been gaslighted. I think most of our negative self talk is as a result of being gaslighted. Um, Remember, gaslighting in particular is about um, when someone gaslights you, they are trying to redefine your reality for you. So they are making you say, like, maybe I am not such a nice person. Maybe I am, you know, a jerk. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I am too this or that. That's gaslighting. And so I think the way we examine whether our strategies are working for us or not is by asking the meta question and becoming the emotion scientist once in a while and just sitting with our regulation repertoire and asking ourselves, is this reframing helping me have better self-esteem? Or is it actually helping me to deal with the emotion? Is this reframing um, um, working for me to better manage the emotion? And so you have to, all strategies, by the way, every strategy in the book, whether it's the self-talk, we can, you can, you know, self your talk into oblivion, not helpful. Just like you can exercise yourself into oblivion. You could go to the gym 6 hours a day to avoid a difficult conversation with your significant other. And that exercise is not an adaptive strategy anymore, even though we say exercise is healthy. Well, you have to analyze it. Why am I using the exercise to what outcome? Oh, the outcome is it's my excuse, it's my avoidance strategy. So sometimes our healthy strategies are actually avoidance strategies if they're used for the wrong purposes. Yes, so reframing is the same as reappraisal. God, so many good questions coming in. Yes, Manta, when you can, you know, empathy is the feeling of someone else's, is there's remember the cognitive empathy, the emotional empathy, the compassionate empathy. But you can in many ways, have too much empathy. And I think what's interesting is that this is where empathy and emotional intelligence come together because I want to empathy, right, for the most part is a healthy phenomenon, feeling, being and caring for others' emotions. But if I'm losing myself in the empathy, that's probably not aligned with my best self. And it's not emotionally intelligent because now I am experiencing more unpleasant feelings and I'm feeling more sadness or anxiety or depression as a result of my empathy. So that would be kind of empathy minus emotional intelligence would be yikes. It's kind of you lose yourself. Empathy plus emotional intelligence is kind of monitoring the empathy and saying, wow, I got to take a break here. I need some space. I need to, do a little bit more self care than other care. Does that resonate with people? On this is why these concepts kind of work together. Great. Gosh, there's so much to talk about. Now, I know we're coming to a kind of a close um, to our book club time together. I do have a question for all of you, though. Give me a yes if you would be interested in the following. So, I have been working on a new assessment tool based on my book that is a questionnaire. It's on the self strategies based on the 8 kind of chapters, and then the strategies that we use or don't use for other people. It is not about, it's not a judgment thing. It's not like, you know, the frequencies or anything like that. What it's really getting at is your tendency, your proclivity to use these particular strategies. And what I thought I would do is in another couple of weeks, I would send it out to everybody who joined the book club, have everybody take it, and then I'd come back and present the results of the findings and have a conversation about what we learned from the research on people's use of these strategies. How does that sound to you? Does it sound interesting? People like the idea? Awesome. Cool. Well, then we will do it. I will be sending out an email. I need about 2 weeks to get this all set up and ready. And then we'll do another kind of follow-up club where we can like unpack the data. And I think that will be really fun. So on that note, thank you for reading my book. I am on this crazy tour right now. Today, Denver, tomorrow, Los Angeles, the next day, Wilmington, Delaware, then New York City, then Connecticut, then Chicago, and then someplace else. But it's been fun learning a lot. And don't stop sending in your questions about the book, your feedback about the book. And if you like the book, please share it with other people. I'm excited for more people to read it. And on that note, I just want to thank you again for joining me. And I wish you the best on the Dealing with Feeling journey. And be well, share the secret, and we'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.